Alright, hello. I'm the best VR boxer. In case you forgot, in case you're new here or you've forgotten, in case you become blind and ignorant to the history, I am the best VR boxer in the world. I'm about to eat some Cinnabon, and then we're going to read Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. Please see the community tab to remember what the deal is. Please see the community tab for the subsequent prerequisite for a video you can watch to get a refresher, some prerequisite knowledge to get your almonds activated and warmed up, a good mental warm-up video and an introduction into what you're going to be hearing me read out loud today. Okay. So first things first, I'm eating Cinnabon because I acquired this copy of Upton Sinclair's The Jungle from an ancient relic of Lee County before it became a minority-majority regime. Before Lee County, Florida became a minority-majority regime, as the Lee County School District so boldly put it. When I was watching Gulf Coast News Now recently, the local news media monopoly that refuses to acknowledge my existence as best VR boxer in the world, they had one of the draconian Freemason shapeshifters on Gulf Coast News Now from the Lee County School District talking about how they were disappointed that the city of Fort Myers city managers failed to prevent ICE during the brief 1.2 seconds that Donald Trump halfway followed through on one of his campaign promises to me and deported some illegal immigrants. One of the draconian shape-shifting vampires that inhabit the Lee County School District that I was forced to go to was saying that they were disappointed that the city of Fort Myers city managers failed to resist ICE in the federal government for the 1.2 seconds that they tried to enforce immigration law in the United States and failed to. One of the shape-shifting vampires of the Lee County School District, an old lady, I think her name was Count Flabula. I think her name was Count Flabula from Transylvania, the draconian shape-shifting vampire that they got to exit her casket for 3.5 seconds and go on Gulf Coast News Now to talk about how they were disappointed that they lost 800 students due to ICE deportations because they have less money this year. They have less money this year now because they enforced the law for 1.5 seconds in Lee County, Florida. She used the double-speak term. She used the double-speak term minority majority. She said minority majority, and she was referring to the fact that this place used to be 90% people with my complexion, not even 100 years ago, more like 40 or 50 years ago. 30 or 40 or 50 years ago, this place used to be 90% people with my skin complexion. And the shape-shifting vampire that Gulf Coast News Now got to from the Lee County School District that they dragged out of her. They probably dug her casket up. They went to Transylvania. They flew to Transylvania directly, and they dug this lady's casket up. And they said, shape-shifting vampire lady from the Lee County School District, we're Gulf Coast News Now. We need you to come on the nightly news and talk about how you're disappointed that the city of Fort Myers city managers failed to resist ICE's deportation attempts for 3.5 seconds. They did it for a whole 5 seconds. ICE tried to deport people in Lee County for a whole 5 seconds before they gave up on deporting anyone in the United States at all, and returned to not enforcing the law at all in the United States when it comes to immigration, that is. Okay, so they flew to Transylvania, and they dug this shape-shifting vampire that works for the Lee County School District up, and they got her to go on Gulf Coast News Now, and she used the doublespeak term that I've never seen such doublespeak employed by a shape-shifting vampire until I saw it then. She said, we're a minority-majority school district. She said minority-majority. Let's try to break that down. Let's try to break the depths of this doublespeak down. Okay? I don't know how you can be a majority and a minority simultaneously, but she is asserting that you can be a majority and a minority. Now, me, I live in reality. I live in reality. So I am aware that people with my skin complexion globally, which should be the only metric that this is measured by, people with my skin complexion globally are the minority. But I don't want to speak too much sense in front of you. I'm just going to eat my Cinnabon. I'm just going to eat my Cinnabon before I start making too much sense. Sorry, I gotta read. This is reading fuel. Reading takes a lot of effort for me, so I gotta fuel. Alright. Now, in case you didn't do your homework that I assigned you, I assigned you homework to do at the beginning of this live stream. And in case you didn't watch a 50-minute video in 9 minutes, alright? In case you didn't watch a 50-minute video in 9 minutes, Upton Sinclair's The Jungle is kind of about how the Lee County sheriffs are running a minority-majority regime. So basically, this all circles back to things that you've seen me doing over the years. If you're an avid Fran Man fan, if you're a Fran-a-maniac, if you're smelling what the Fran's cooking, alright? If you're smelling what the Fran's cooking, if you're a real Fran-a-maniac, if you can't get enough Fran Man, and you followed my exploits and adventures over the years, my escapades on the internet, if you're a Fran Man lore keeper, if you're a Fran Man gatekeeper, if you're trying to have your finger on the Fran Man pulse, and you've been doing so for years, if you're in it for the long haul, you know, if you're riding this train back to the station, what Upton Sinclair is talking about in this book is basically goes into everything that I've been saying and doing, and everything that you've been seeing me saying and doing. The Lee County sheriffs run a minority-majority regime here in Southwest Florida. Okay, this is what it gets into, what I'm talking about when I say that all the Lee County sheriffs are interested in doing, seemingly from someone like me's perspective, is protecting these corrupt, illegal immigrant hiring businesses of the minority-majority regime, as Count Flabula of the Lee County School District so eloquently put it on Gulf Coast News Now. News monopoly here in Southwest Florida that is infamous for running a several-day news segment about how one of these broccoli-headed jits, one of the majority of the minority-majority, as Count Flabula from Transylvania of the Lee County School District so eloquently put it on News Monopoly Gulf Coast News Now. What's it called? Ministry of Truth broadcast. Yeah, the Gulf Coast News Now's ministry, the Gulf Coast News Now, Southwest Florida's news monopoly, their Ministry of Truth broadcast. All right, got a good old Ministry of Truth broadcast that I was tuned into. Me, John Savage here, Fran John Savage, was tuning in to Gulf Coast News Now's did a multi-day news segment where they kept running this bumper over and over, and they even got it on their website and their social medias and shit, about how some broccoli-headed jit, the majority, okay, a member of the majority, because again, let's reestablish that Count Flabula, they went to Transylvania and they found her tomb. They opened her sarcophagus and they reawakened her. They performed a ritual on her to reawaken her, to reanimate her in her tomb in Transylvania. And Count Flabula of the Lee County School District went on a Ministry of Truth broadcast and was talking about how, Southwest Florida is a majority area, and they lost like $87 million in funding when ICE came through and deported the Central, South American, and Caribbean children that they've been boating in here for decades and decades. Like I've been telling you, I told you I've been the minority my entire life, but you need do no more than check a recent Ministry of Truth broadcast from Southwest Florida's media monopoly Gulf Coast News Now, where they got Count Flabula from Transylvania of the Lee County School District to go on a Ministry of Truth broadcast and say that the Lee County school system is a majority school system, meaning I'm the motherfucking minority. That means I'm the goddamn minority. That means I've been the minority my whole life. That means my mom, who was also born here, was a motherfucking minority, okay? And furthermore, what's hilarious about that is that they shove anti-white sentiment down these children's throats in elementary school. They put anti-pale sentiments in these Central, South American, and Caribbean. Some of these people are from fucking Haiti, okay? That they push this narrative down their throats at a young age, okay? When you're in elementary school here in Lee County, they are already doing entire hour-long segments, history class, history time. I remember this vividly. I remember people gawking at me like I did it to them personally when they interrupted fucking elementary school for the history subject hour, okay? Where they sat there. I was so ignorant of my complexion and the differences between my complexion and my peers' complexions. I was so ignorant of that before shit like this happened in fucking elementary school to me, okay? That when they were talking about the Egyptians, I thought they were talking about America. I thought they were talking about America when they were talking about the pyramids and shit in fucking history in elementary school. Before they did shit like this to me, where they did their fucking history hour in elementary school to me, and they started talking about slavery and segregation and shit like that, and then like all of the non-pale kids are staring at me for no reason in fucking elementary school, by the way, okay? But yeah, so that's been like that for generations in Southwest Florida. And again, they start teaching people this U.S. interpretation of history in fucking elementary school here in a majority school system. And you wonder why I have this chip on my shoulder and why I've always felt ostracized when Lee County's been majority since I was a kid and since my mom was a fucking kid. Okay, Lee County's been majority, meaning I'm the fucking minority. Meaning I'm the minority. Okay? But getting back to that, because they do shit like shove this warped interpretation of history that the United States teaches, where they start telling you about the fucking massacring of Native Americans, and they gloss over the fact They gloss over the fact that it was a Portugal and Spanish expedition that came here and got this whole shit started to begin with. They gloss right over the fact that the motherfuckers that came here and initially started doing this shit were Spanish and Portuguese, which is not, they don't look like me, but fucking, they gloss right over that shit, right? They gloss right over that shit, right? They're like, they'll be like, European, it was a European expedition from, and then they'll be like, from Portugal. It was a European expedition from Portugal. But they'll be like, British people went to Europe, they went to Portugal. Like, they'll gloss right over that it was a Spanish and Portuguese fucking expedition that started all this shit off. And they'll just start telling these Central South American, Haitian, and fucking Caribbean students, like, yeah, the white settler. So, anyway, Upton Sinclair, right? Upton Sinclair, the jungle, right? Gets into everything that I've been telling you. Upton Sinclair's The Jungle gets into the nuts and bolts of what I've been telling you. It gets into the nuts and bolts of everything that I've been telling you on this channel. If you're an avid Fran Man follower, this gets into everything that you see. If you go and look at the recent clip from a live stream that I posted, where Dallas and Latasha, the disgraceful military veterans that are stealing adjacent, as someone that's defense adjacent currently, someone that's currently defense adjacent, okay, Dallas is not actively anything in the defense sector, okay. Number one, the U.S. military's importance in the defense of the United States is diminished, okay. The role that they play in the actual defense of the United States is severely diminished, okay. When it comes to the defense sector of the United States, when you're encompassing public and private businesses, municipalities, entities that contribute to the defense of the United States, the U.S. military's role in actually defending the United States is diminished, okay. They do not play an important role. Someone whose job or thing that they did for the United States military, the importance of someone like Dallas and Latasha is probably not that much, okay. They're probably have as much to do with the actual defense of the United States as someone who stands in a field and kicks rocks for 12 hours a day. So with that being said, Dallas and Latasha are stealing my valor, okay. Someone who's an actual cog in the machine that contributes to the so-called defense of the United States, which I like to call cashing checks and putting them in my pocketbook. So Dallas and Latasha are stealing my valor over there at the Jimmy John's on Summerlin Road in Fort Myers, Florida. They're not actively doing anything for the United States other than running a popularity contest for a former judge, which I would say is doing next to nothing for the United States. I would say it's almost doing less than nothing. I would say that Dallas and Latasha are actively poisoning the United States by feeding people overpriced slop and being arrogant and obnoxious about it, and trying to run a popularity contest and pretending they're still in the Navy or something like that. Over there at the Jimmy John's on Summerlin Road in Fort Myers, Florida. They're not actively involved in the defense sector in any way, shape, or form. So I would say that they're stealing valor by mentioning that they were in the military at some point to people, as if that's some kind of reason that we should respect them or take their word for it, or allow them to be rude and disrespectful to the citizens that they supposedly swore to protect. Okay, that's another thing. You supposedly swore to protect the citizens of the United States. You supposedly swore to serve the citizens of the United States, and you're doing that by being rude and disrespectful to people and running a popularity contest into Jimmy John's for a former judge, the prison industrial complex. You're being rude, arrogant, and condescending to people to help put money in someone who served the prison industrial complex. That's another reason. Dallas is kind of a cuck, really, if you think about it. Dallas is kind of a cuckold because he claims that he was in prison, but Sean Hess is a former judge, and he swore to protect and serve Americans by being in the Navy, but he's protecting and serving not only the corrupt business Jimmy John's, which is a part of Inspire Brands, but the specific franchise owner, Sean Hess, who served the prison industrial complex, who is putting chains on the people frivolously, okay, not equally enforcing the law, the people that Dallas and Latasha swore to protect and serve. So I was protecting and serving the entire time the people that Dallas and Latasha swore to protect and serve better than them, and they're the ones that are trying to steal the valor. And not only that, I actively right now, actively am defense adjacent, and by being defense adjacent, work in the broader defense sector of the United States, which Dallas and Latasha do not. Dallas and Latasha are on bended knee serving the prison industrial complex by trying to be gatekeepers for a minimum wage job, by the way, for a business owned by a former judge, which is a part of the prison industrial complex, that is frivolously putting chains on people born in this country, putting them in indentured servitude, basically. If you go and look at the jobs that they have going on within the prison industrial complex that are akin to indentured servitude, okay? And Dallas has been through that system himself, and he wants to sit there and say things like it's their business and try to throw the people that he swore to serve and protect under the bus. So I just want to take another couple dozen minutes to dunk on Dallas and Latasha there again. So with that being said, let's get into reading Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. That gave you a little bit of time to do some of your homework if you're participating in the festivities here. That gave you some time to do your homework. And let's take a hit of the backwoods pen here before we get into reading Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. Alright, this is a Franio book for all the Franimaniacs out there. Read by the best VR boxer in the world, if not history. Alright, if not of all time. Okay? Kind of a big deal. Alright. This is like the preamble or something. Upton Sinclair was born into an impoverished Baltimore family on September 20th, 1878. At 15, he began writing a series of dime novels in order to pay for his education at the City College of New York. He was later accepted to do graduate work at Columbia. I don't know where Columbia is. And wait, do they mean in the Caribbeans? And while there, he published a number of novels, including the Journal of Arthur Sterling, 1903, that was in parentheses, and Manassas, 1904, that was also in parentheses. Sinclair's breakthrough came in 1906 with the publication of The Jungle, a scathing indictment of the vile health and working conditions of the Chicago meatpacking industry. The work, comma, which won him great literary praise, comma, helped in the passage of the pure food laws during the Progressive Era. What the hell is the Progressive Era? What the fuck is the Progressive Era? Anyway, he also joined the company of several writers and journalists of the time who were branded as muckrakers. In the thing that I posted, it said that he is muckraker adjacent, so perhaps this is referencing that. You're a muckraker. Anyway, hold on. By President Theodore Roosevelt. In the video that I watched that I posted on my community tab, it said that he talked to President Theodore Roosevelt shortly after the publication of this novel, and that shortly after the publication of this novel, there was like real world action taken in the United States to try to dampen the effect of this book being disseminated amongst the populace, while the written word was the most viral way for information to disseminate in that era. Sinclair used the money from the jungle to begin a utopian experiment. The Helicon Hall colony of Inglewood, comma, New Jersey, period, in 1915. He moved to California. It looks like there should be a comma there, but there is not a comma there. He moved to California, where he unsuccessfully ran for public office on 4 occasions. He wrote several politically progressive pamphlets and became a powerful figure in California's Democratic Party, almost winning the governorship in 1934. After his defeat, he continued to write books. Later works include World's End, Dragon's Teeth, World's End 1940, Dragon's Teeth 1942, both of those were in parentheses, which won him a Pulitzer Prize. World's End, Dragon Teeth. Oh, Shepherd, Speak, comma, that's not a comma. Oh, Shepherd, comma, Speak, exclamation point, 1949 in parentheses, and Another Pamela in italics. All of those were in italics also. They were written in italics. And Another Pamela, written in italics, 1950 in parentheses. Ronald Goddersman. That's a name. Hold on. Ronald Goddersman was born in Boston and earned degrees from the University of Massachusetts and from Colgate and Indiana universities. He has taught literature, film studies, and humanities courses at Northwestern Indiana and Rutgers universities, the University of Wisconsin, and the University of Southern California, where for 9 years he directed the Center for the Humanities, founding editor of the Quarterly Review of Film Studies and Humanities in Society. Professor Goddersman is editor and author of many articles and books on literature and film, including 3 on Upton Sinclair. Okay. That was 1 page. That was not even the fucking introduction. That was like the preamble. That was the fucking preamble. I think Penguin Publishers wrote that. Okay, God. More than any other novel of its time, introduction by the way, more than any other novel of its time, The Jungle brought together dramatically and put into sharp moral focus the social, political, and economic problems that lurked below the cheerful surface of American life at the turn of the century. In his passionate, flawed masterpiece, Upton Sinclair provided a voice to the great masses of immigrants who had come to America yearning to be... He's talking about a different era of immigrants, by the way. He's not talking about the same era of immigrants. But anyway, so in his passionate, flawed masterpiece, Upton Sinclair provided a voice to the great masses of immigrants who had come to America yearning to be freed and comfortable, and who had found instead the wage slavery and misery of mill, factory, sweatshop, and slum. So that's glossing over the fact that that's the same working condition. We're talking about like the... Okay, so we're talking about off of the cusp of indentured servitude, slavery, child labor. So like, okay, so like, I don't know why the emphasis is being placed on immigrants necessarily, because people born here were not subjected to better conditions. Okay, so like, I'm not subjected to better conditions than people immigrating here. So like, for instance, in the recent investigative journalism by the street interview YouTubers, where he was investigating the ghost office things with like Indians and stuff like that, with H-1B visa recipients, an Indian going like, oh, I'm being replaced by AI, oh, I'm being everyone born here is being subjected to the same hardships. So I don't know, just say that things aren't good here for the worker anyway. So The Jungle remains the best and most powerful proletarian novel ever published in the United States. Its agonized cry for justice has reverberated across the years, not least because the conditions it protested have been duplicated as industrialization has spread around the world. So again, everyone is subjected to this shit. Anyway, Upton Sinclair Jr. was born in Baltimore, Maryland on September 20th, 1878. The only child of Upton Beale and Priscilla Hardin Sinclair. His paternal great-grandfather, a veteran of the Revolutionary War. Hold on, internet. Don't all of a sudden go, well, what's the significance of that? Well, what does that matter? Anyway, so his paternal great-grandfather, a veteran of the Revolutionary War, a hero of the War of 1812, and one of the founders of the Naval Academy at Annapolis, was the first in a line of distinguished naval officers and Virginia aristocrats, a line that came close. So is that perhaps where the immigrants have it so bad mindset comes from? Is that perhaps where the immigrants have it so bad because I was born here and I have a good life, so everyone born here has a good life? It's like, no, the people immigrating here are working alongside people born here in the poor working conditions. Have you ever fathomed that, perhaps? Have you ever fathomed that maybe, oh shit, I don't want to beat you over the head too hard with facts, but maybe the people born here are working alongside the people immigrating here in the poor working conditions? Anyway. A line that came to a close with the displacement of Confederate supporters following the Civil War. Upton Sr., born a few years before this war, was for a time a wholesale whiskey distributor in Baltimore. In the later 1880s, when the family moved to New York, he sold hats to clothing stores. Throughout his adult life, the author's father was an irregular provider and an alcoholic. What the fuck does irregular provider mean? An irregular provider and an alcoholic. He died in 1907 of delirium tremens. Sinclair's mother also came of a good Southern family. Her father was a deacon of the Methodist Church. I think that's Protestant in Baltimore, and secretary-treasurer of the Western Maryland Railroad. And Uncle John Randolph Bland founded the United States Fidelity and Guarantee Company and became one of the wealthiest men in Baltimore. As a child, Upton was thus caught between the piety, Puritanism, and gentility. Do they mean Gentile? Gentility of his mother, and the poverty and degradation to which his father's drinking exposed the family. I think they mean Gentile by gentility. What the fuck does the fuck does gentility mean? What does gentility mean? Anyway, and the poverty and degradation to which his father's drinking exposed the family deeply. I think they literally mean Gentile by gentility. Anyway, because they were talking about the spiritual faiths of his family and shit and his upbringing, and then they're like, as a child, Upton was thus caught between the piety, puritanism, and gentility of his mother. I don't think they mean his mother was a gentle person. What else could they mean by gentility? What fucking form of speech like what tense is that grammatically? Gentile, gentility. Your gentileness? Is that literally like akin to being like gentileness? Anyway. And the poverty and degradation to which his father's drinking exposed the family, deeply pained by his father's lack of self-restraint and frivolousness, young Sinclair turned to his mother for support and affection, but his mother's lack of intellectual curiosity and her social pretentiousness. Alright. Her social pretentiousness later created problems in the relationship, and Sinclair had to find... This is the fucking introduction, by the way. This is the fucking introduction of the book, by the way. Deeply pained by his father's lack of self-restraint and frivolousness, young Sinclair turned to his mother for support and affection, but his mother's lack of intellectual curiosity and her social pretentiousness later created problems in the relationship, and Sinclair had to find a series of surrogates to feed his emotional, moral, and intellectual hunger. As he observed in his autobiography, the favorite theme of his fiction is the contrast between the social classes. This contrast between the rich and the poor was the essential material and emotional fact of Sinclair's childhood, and the driving force behind his mature literary achievement and political commitment. Sinclair's childhood and young manhood. Anyway. Sinclair's childhood and young manhood were spent chiefly in New York City. He did not go to school until he was 10. He didn't go to school until he was 10? Why did he not go to school until he was 10? How did he write this book if he didn't go to school until he was 10? Since he was omnivorous and precocious. Since he was an omnivorous and precocious reader, it did not take him long to make up what he had missed. 5 days before his 14th birthday, he entered the College of the City of New York, then an old brick building at Lexington Avenue and 23rd Street, from which he graduated in 1897. It took him 4 years to finish school. He went to school in 4 years. Anyway. In the fall of that year, Sinclair entered Columbia. How many schools did this fucker go to? Sinclair entered Columbia University, where he spent 3 years as a special student, taking courses in philosophy, history, literature, and music, with such famous professionals as Nicholas Murray Butler, James Harvey Robinson, George Edward Woodbury, and Edward MacDowell. While Sinclair was a student at CCNY, he began to write puzzles, jokes, cartoons, captions, and eventually stories for newspapers and magazines. He had earned enough money from his activity to be able to leave home for a rented room as a graduate student at Columbia. He continued to write. He was paid $40 a week for Spanish-American war adventure stories by the publisher Street and Smith. Sinclair had entered Columbia with the idea that he would spend a year studying literature and philosophy before going to law school. But the more he read Shakespeare, Milton, Emerson, and Shirley, the more convinced he became that he had been chosen to be an artist prophet who would help usher in a new dawn for mankind. Let me read that again. But the more he read Shakespeare, Milton, Emerson, and Shirley, the more convinced he became that he had been chosen to be an artist prophet who would help usher in a new dawn for mankind. As an adolescent and a young man, Sinclair attempted to channel his strong religious feelings and moral idealism, and to sublimate his powerful sexual drive. Into an art worthy of his divine fictional and human idols. Jesus, Hamlet, and Shelley. His first self-published novel, Springtime and Harvest, 1901, told the story of a young woman's soul redeemed by high and noble love. While there are some references to economic inequities in this sentimental narrative, the object of Sinclair's criticism is materialism, not capitalism. The mode of reform endorsed is personal purity, not collective political action. At this point in his life, and until he discovered socialism, Sinclair believed that artists had failed society. not vice versa. In the novel's preface, Sinclair spoke of a dream that someday he might build a tremendous force for the spreading of light. Sinclair believed that artists had failed society, not vice versa. In the novel's preface, Sinclair spoke of a dream that someday he might build a tremendous force for the spreading of light. By establishing a library of his own and others' books, for the purpose of increasing helpful reading among the humble people of our land. Even in this first book, then published a year before, Sinclair had discovered socialism, were foreshadowed the roles of prophet, reformer, novelist, and publicist that would become so familiar over the next 6 decades. Soon after he finished Springtime and Harvest, Sinclair married Meta Fuller, the young woman with whom he had shared his youthful vision, in a small cabin by a lake in Quebec. The marriage was ill-advised. The fictionalized account of their anguished life together. They were divorced in 1912. Is told in Lover's Pilgrimage, 1911. The birth year of their son David, on December 1st, 1901, simply exacerbated an unhappy relationship for a hopelessly mismatched young couple with no dependable means of support. Following the terrible disappointment of his hopes for Springtime and Harvest in the fall and winter of 1900 to 1901, the Sinclairs left New York in the spring for the Thousand Islands in the St. Lawrence River and a life of primitive simplicity. While Upton went to work on his second romantic novel, Prince Hagen, a Fantasy, 1903, this book was an outspoken fable, a critique of political, economic, and religious institutions in America. Hold on. It is getting hot in here, and I am wearing boots and jeans. Where was I? The central creed in this work, however, is not socialistic. Rather, the author-narrator reflecting on this huge, overgrown civilization of ours, this vast machine-built jungle, is led to the conclusion that it must be the fault of the artist, who are its soul, there being among them no man with any thought of strenuous living, or the need of truth, nor soul to scourge the selfishness and fire the hearts of the coming men with generous emotion and resolve. The millennium is still seen under the aspect of beauty. The prophet is still the heroically triumphant artist. The sculptures are still those of literature and romantic music. The hope for transformation is... The hoped for transformation still an inner spiritual conversion of the heart. That was a good one. Hold on, let me try that again. The millennium is still seen under the aspect of beauty. The prophet is still the heroically triumphant artist. The scriptures are still those of literature and romantic music. The hoped for transformation is still an inner spiritual conversion of the heart. Okay, I got it that time. The manuscript of Prince Hagen was rejected in the following months by 17 magazines and 22 publishing houses. One result of this humiliation is apparent in Sinclair's next book, The Journal of Arthur Sterling, written during the spring and summer of 1902. The story Arthur Sterling tells is one of suicide, of how a poet and man of genius, driven to despair by the failure of the public to accept his work and provide him with the modest support he needs to continue writing his poetry, drowns himself in the Hudson River. The journal is not a merely fictional representation of Sinclair's mood. Sinclair indeed turned the fiction into something like that by actually having Sterling's obituary published in the New York Times on June 9th, 1902. About the time Sinclair finished writing the journal, this hoax, moreover, was carefully exploited by Sinclair, an editor at D. Appleton, and when the book was first published, it provoked a small fervor of sympathy from the gullible presses and public. The suicide by drowning of Arthur Sterling marks precisely the submersion of the pure poet, the devotee of art, in Upton Sinclair. Only by means of this symbolic self-execution could Sinclair hope to survive as a man and as a writer, though a writer of a very different kind. Where was I? Sinclair's imagination had betrayed him. The feverish pursuit of the cluster of false lights, art, beauty, inspiration, poetry, love, had brought him to ruin. His marriage, romantically undertaken, had already become a nightmare. His attempts at pure literature had failed to impress either the publishers or the public. He was alienated from his family, virtually friendless and living in poverty. In the fall of 1902, when Sinclair returned to New York from the Thousand Islands and the Adirondacks, we're still in the introduction, by the way. He made the acquaintance of Leonard D. Abbott at the offices of Literary Digest, and though Abbott was introduced to socialism and some influential American socialists, among them George D. Heron and Gaylord Wilshire, these men, like many other American socialists, were profoundly religious. Heron had been a Congregationalist clergyman, and it is no wonder that when Sinclair described the experience of discovering socialism, he did so as a conversion, as a visitation by angels, as the falling down of prison walls about my mind. Although this fundamentally Christian socialism was to provide the theoretical economic framework for most of the rest of his career, the principal fact the socialists had to reach, Sinclair remarked later, was that they themselves existed. His disaffection from a society based, as he saw it, on greed and competitiveness was already deep. He needed both company and a program of action to serve as support and focus for his high resolve to change things. Before he could actively participate in socialist affairs, Sinclair had to discharge the residue of venom he had secreted against a society that had driven him to destroy himself as a poet. During the winter of 1902 to 1903, a time that marked the nadir of his life, Sinclair wrote A Captain of Industry, which he later called the most ferocious of my stories. The book is an uncontrolled narrative of revenge. The summer before, Sinclair had been forced to drown himself, and now he would rise from his watery grave and wreak his vengeance upon Satan. In the guise of the wealthy playboy Robbie Van Rensselaer, the story tells how Robbie's father Chauncey pays off and sends away Daisy, a poor girl with whom his son has been intimate. In very short order, the father dies, Robbie becomes a captain of industry, and at 40, though remarried, falls in love with a young girl. The girl, Mary Harrison, is discovered by the lovers to be Robbie's daughter by Daisy. When they learn this horrible fact, Mary blows her brains out, but Robbie is not let off so easily. He makes $100 million on the stock market before he is allowed to get drunk and take his yacht to sea, where it is caught in the storm and all aboard are killed. The disproportionate detail lavished on the fate of Robbie Van Rensselaer's body is a sign of Sinclair's rage. All night long, the waves play catch in the moonlight with the body, until when the morning broke, it was swollen and purple, and it lay half hidden in the sand. Denied the peace of total destruction or complete burial, the body must undergo still further dishonor before being allowed to return to the civilized world of merely hypocritical Fifth Avenue funerals. Innumerable small creatures feed on this choice morsel before a poor fisherman can render the final insults of failing to recognize who the dead man is and complaining that he smells like the devil. The extreme rancor with which Sinclair satisfied his vendetta is a measure of what he felt. He had lost, and a warning sign of his inexorability in the future. But for the time being, his outrage was pacified sufficiently to allow him to go to the more noble, if still bloody, subject of the Civil War. Just why Sinclair determined to write a fully documented trilogy of novels on the Civil War is not clear. Just why Sinclair determined to write a fully documented trilogy of novels on the Civil War is not clear. Certainly, if he was going to redeem America, it would help to know its history, particularly as that history centered on the exploitation of race and class. Sinclair sought a patron to support him while he did the research and wrote the first volume, and finally persuaded his wealthy socialist friend George D. Herron to advance him $200 and to promise a $30 a month stipend for the year. Armed with Herron's promise of support, Sinclair belligerently announced his intentions to the world in My Cause. In this article, Sinclair announced, among other things, that he was going to make his life's work the completion of a trilogy of novels with the collective title The American. This work was to be an attempt to make an imaginative picture of the Civil War, to place it with its agonies and its terrors as a living reality before mankind. With that typically paradoxical attitude of the Native American radical, Sinclair planned to invoke the sacred American past in order to mitigate the profanity of the present. At about the time My Cause was published, the Sinclairs moved into two tense north of Princeton, New Jersey. Manassas, the first volume of the trilogy, was completed in the spring of 1904 and published by Macmillan that August. Although Sinclair hadn't yet found his true meteor, contemporary history as fictional expose, Manassas is marked by certain features and techniques that would become, over the years, typical patterns and stock devices in his work. Alan Montague is the prototype in Sinclair's fiction of the comfortable and conventional man of basic goodwill who is converted to the role of active moral agent through an intellectual enlightenment that becomes an emotional reaction. That is, having seen the light, he becomes a zealous advocate of reform. The novel is marked also by simplistic conceptions of character and issue. The good are poor, absent laborers, victimized by the sensual, hard-drinking men of property. Present too are a sometimes brilliantly realized rendering of surface detail, a skillful journalistic description of complex processes, and a lucid presentation of complicated issues. Allen's chance meetings with Jefferson Davis, John Brown, President Lincoln, and others strain credibly the severely but sometimes beset pieces, once excused, can be appreciated for their effectiveness. And just as the omnipresent Alan Montague foreshadows the ubiquitous Lanny Budd of later days, so does the fundamental failure of achieved form that makes this all-purpose character necessary suggest one of the telling deficiencies of nearly all of Sinclair's future work. Ideologically as well as biographically, The Jungle grew out of Manassas after finishing the Civil War novel. Sinclair devoted himself to reading socialist theory and he followed with great interest a strike of the workers in Chicago's Union stockyards in the summer of 1904. The news of the strike had appeared in the socialist paper with the widest circulation, appeal to reason. When the strike was finally broken, the workers forced to resume their difficult and dangerous jobs with little improvement in pay and conditions. Sinclair's contributed his first piece of militant socialist writing to the appeal. This took the form of a front-page article, also distributed as a broadside entitled, "You have lost the strike, and now what are you going to do about it?" Identifying himself as a man who wants neither the workers' money nor their votes, Sinclair delivers a powerful sermon to those who have been forced back to work. In this incanatory piece, Sinclair delivers the familiar message about the handful of men who own all the instruments and means of production and who distribute in inequability the profits earned by the sweat of exploited laborers. He concludes with a reminder that the workers' only hope lies with the Socialist Party and its presidential candidate Eugene V. Debs. Undoubtedly encouraged by Appeal editor Fred D. Warren's enthusiastic reception of the strike article, Sinclair sent him a copy of the message just published by Macmillan. Impressed by this novel of the Civil War, and especially by the vivid description of the slaves' attempt to escape from his pursuers in the swamps of the Mississippi Delta. In the swamps of the Mississippi Delta, Warren was so impressed that he suggested Sinclair apply his talents to an expose of the conditions of wage slaves in an industrial setting. Sinclair replied that he would do just that. If the appeal to reason advanced him the $500 he required to gather the necessary information and to live with while he shaped the data into a novel, with the understanding that the right money would be an advance payment for serial rights. This took the form of a front-page article, also distributed as a broadside entitled, "You Have Lost the Strike, and Now What Are You Going to Do About It?" Warren was greatly inspired by this novel of the Civil War, and especially by the vivid description of the If the appeal to reason advanced him $500, he required to gather the necessary information and to live for a year while he shaped the data into a novel, with the understanding that the money would be an advance payment for serial rights. The offer was made and accepted long before Sinclair considered Packingtown a likely subject for a novel. The Beef Trust, as it was greatly called, had been scrutinized and attacked from several directions during investigations of the charges of graft in connection with the rotten meat supplied to the Army during the Spanish-American War. Theodore Roosevelt had testified that the meat sent to Cuba was unfit for human consumption. Indeed, Thomas F. Dolan, a former superintendent of the Armor Company, had signed an affidavit exposing the common practice of packing condemned meat. A documentary published in the New York Journal, March 4, 1899, by 1904. When Sinclair had first become directly concerned with the beef trust, Charles Edward Russell had begun publishing in magazine form the series of articles that would later be gathered into a book, The Greatest Trust in the World, Appeal to Reason, Wilshires, and a number of